The morning sun rose over New Terra like it had done for 60 years. The golden light spread across endless fields of wheat and corn. In the capital city of Meridian, people walked to work. Children played in parks. Life was peaceful and ordinary. Paul Henderson sat in his office on the top floor of the governor's building. He was drinking coffee and reading reports about this year's harvest. The numbers looked good. New Terra was doing well. 2 million people called this planet home now. They had built schools, hospitals, and farms. They had created a good life here. Paul thought about his daughter. She was 7 years old and loved her school. She wanted to be a farmer when she grew up. He smiled at the thought. His wife was a teacher at the elementary school downtown. This was home. This was everything they had worked for. At the defense headquarters across town, Commander Jake Sullivan was also starting his day. He commanded 800 soldiers who protected the colony. Most days were quiet. They helped with emergencies and stopped the occasional pirate who got too close. Jake sometimes wondered if they even needed a military force. New Terra was so far from any conflict. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at her console in the communications center. She monitored space around the planet. Her job was boring most days. She watched for asteroids, tracked incoming supply ships, and made sure the satellites were working. Today felt like every other day. Then her screen changed. Strange readings appeared at the edge of the star system. Amy sat up straight. The energy signatures were massive. She had never seen anything like this before. Her hands moved quickly across the keyboard. She ran the scan again. The results were the same. Amy picked up the phone and called Commander Sullivan. Her voice was steady but urgent. Something big was coming. Something very big. Jake listened to her report and felt his stomach tighten. He told her to keep monitoring and alert all stations. He grabbed his jacket and ran for his vehicle. Within an hour, the truth became clear. 60 massive warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They appeared on every screen in the defense center. The ships were huge, dark, and covered in weapons. They moved into formation around New Terra like wolves surrounding prey. Paul Henderson rushed to the defense center. He had never seen anything like these ships. Earth had told them about other alien species in the galaxy, but New Terra had never encountered any. Now 60 warships surrounded his planet. His hands were shaking. A message came through on all channels. The voice was deep and harsh. It spoke through a translator. The creature called itself War Prince Thrax of the Varakthi Dominion. The message was simple and terrible. New Terra would surrender immediately. The people would submit to Varakthi rule. There would be no negotiation. Paul tried to respond. He opened a channel and spoke carefully. He said they were peaceful. He asked to discuss terms. He offered to contact Earth for proper diplomatic talks. His words seemed reasonable and calm. The response was immediate. The 6 defense satellites orbiting New Terra exploded in bright flashes. Just like that, the colony's eyes in space were gone. The Varakthi had answered with violence. There would be no discussion. There would be no mercy. Commander Sullivan ordered evacuation protocols. Alarms blared across the planet. People looked up at the sky in confusion and fear. Parents grabbed their children. Teachers tried to keep students calm. But there were 2 million people spread across hundreds of settlements. There was nowhere to go. There was no time. The bombardment began an hour later. Beams of energy lanced down from orbit. Explosions erupted across the planet. The Varakthi targeted everything. Government buildings, power stations, communications towers, and homes all burned the same. The attack was not strategic. It was destruction for its own sake. Danny Morris worked in the main communications array outside Meridian. He saw the dropships coming down through the smoke. Massive metal pods carrying Varakthi soldiers. He knew he had minutes at most. He recorded everything his cameras could see. The ships, the destruction, the alien soldiers emerging from their transports. Danny packaged the footage with a desperate message. He sent it toward the nearest human outpost using the emergency beacon. The transmission lasted 30 seconds. Then missiles destroyed the array. Danny never knew if his message got through. The building collapsed around him. The Varakthi soldiers were nightmares made real. They stood 8 feet tall with scales-like armor. Their eyes were yellow and cold. They carried weapons that fired bolts of plasma. They moved through settlements with terrifying efficiency. They killed everyone they found. Jake Sullivan gathered his soldiers at defensive positions around Meridian. They had rifles and light armor. Against Varakthi warriors in powered combat suits, they were like children with toys. But they fought anyway. They fought because people were trying to evacuate. They fought because it was their duty. They fought because someone had to. The battle for Meridian lasted 6 hours. Jake's soldiers made the Varakthi pay for every street, but the outcome was never in doubt. The alien warriors were stronger, faster, and better armed. One by one, the defensive positions fell. Jake found himself at the children's hospital with 30 soldiers and no ammunition left. Varakthi warriors surrounded the building. Jake looked at his soldiers. They were young. Most had joined the defense force hoping for easy careers. Now they would die here. He gave them a choice: surrender and maybe live, or make a last stand. Every single soldier stayed. They held the hospital for 2 more hours using whatever they could find. Furniture became barricades. Medical equipment became improvised weapons. When the Varakthi finally broke through, Jake was still standing. He took down 4 more warriors before plasma fire cut him down. He died knowing that 300 children had escaped through the back tunnels. Paul Henderson was captured in the governor's building. Varakthi soldiers dragged him to the central plaza. War Prince Thrax wanted to make an example. The alien commander stood over Paul and spoke in that harsh translated voice. He called humans weak. He called them cattle fit only for servitude or death. Paul looked up at the monster standing over him. He thought about his daughter and his wife. He hoped they had escaped somehow. He hoped they were still alive. He wanted to say something brave, something defiant. But words seemed pointless now. Instead, he simply refused to bow his head. The execution was broadcast across the planet. The message was clear. This was what happened to human leaders. This was what happened to anyone who resisted. The Varakthi wanted fear and submission. By the end of the first day, 1.8 million people were dead. The survivors were rounded up and herded into detention camps. Families were separated. The wounded received no care. The Varakthi treated humans like insects, annoying pests to be controlled or eliminated. Above the planet, War Prince Thrax composed his report to the Varakthi High Command. The conquest was complete. The humans had been weak and poorly defended. He recommended immediate expansion into other human territories. They could easily conquer 10 more colonies with the forces available. Thrax had no way of knowing that Danny's message had reached the relay station. The transmission was now jumping from outpost to outpost, racing toward Earth. Every second brought it closer to humanity's home system. Every second brought it closer to those who would see the footage and understand what had happened. 8 days after New Terra fell, the message arrived at Earth. It was late at night when the emergency channels activated. Military commanders were woken up. Government officials rushed to secure facilities. President Laura Bennett was pulled from her bed to watch the footage in the Situation Room. She watched in silence as the screen showed New Terra burning. She saw civilians running from plasma fire. She saw children gunned down in streets. She saw the execution of Paul Henderson. She saw everything. When the footage ended, the room was completely quiet. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, Laura spoke. Her voice was soft, but everyone heard the steel beneath it. She said just 3 words. Call them all. Within 12 hours, every military leader in human space stood in the emergency council chamber. Admiral Frank Carter had commanded the Terran Defense Fleet for 15 years. He had fought pirates and defended trade routes. He had never seen anything like the footage from New Terra. His jaw was clenched as he watched it for the 3rd time. President Laura Bennett stood at the head of the table. Her eyes were red, but her voice was clear. She asked each person in the room a simple question. Can we win? One by one, the military leaders answered. The response was always the same: yes, we can win. We will win. The Terran Assembly met that afternoon. Representatives from every colony filled the chamber. The debate was short. Nobody argued against military action. Nobody suggested negotiation. The vote was called after 2 hours. The result was unanimous. Humanity was going to war. Admiral Carter left the assembly and went straight to fleet headquarters. He had work to do. His staff was already pulling files and making calculations. How many ships did they have? How many could they build? How long would it take? The numbers were better than he expected. Humanity had been building in peace, but they had been building a lot. The shipyards above Earth buzzed with activity. Construction crews worked in shifts around the clock. Ships that were half-finished got priority. New keels were laid down every day. The yards above Mars and Luna did the same. Humanity's industrial power, built over 2 centuries of space expansion, turned toward one purpose: war. Captain Helen Brooks received her orders 3 days after the vote. She was being given command of a new battle group: 6 cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 40 support ships. Her mission was to form the vanguard of the first Retribution fleet. Helen had spent 20 years in the Navy. She knew her job. Now she would do it with a vengeance. Recruitment centers opened on every colony. The response shocked even the most optimistic planners. Lines of volunteers stretched for blocks. Young men and women waited hours for their chance to sign up. They came from farms and cities. They came from factories and schools. They all wanted the same thing: to make the Varakthi pay. Sergeant Kevin Turner ran training at Camp Freedom on Mars. He was a tough instructor who had trained Marines for 12 years. Now his camps were overflowing. Every building was full. Tents covered the training fields. Kevin looked at the faces of the new recruits and saw something he had never seen before: pure determination. These people were not playing soldier. They were preparing for war. Intelligence Director Marcus Webb coordinated the spy operations. Human agents equipped with the latest stealth technology slipped into Varakthi space. They needed information: ship numbers, base locations, supply routes, and political structure. Every piece of data would help. Every bit of intelligence could save human lives. The first reports came back after 3 weeks. The Varakthi Dominion controlled 40 star systems. They had a military force of roughly 800 warships spread across their territory. They were a genuine empire built on conquest and subjugation, but the intelligence also revealed weaknesses. The Varakthi had grown lazy. They had not fought a real war in generations. General Claire Mitchell studied the reports in her office. She was chief of strategic planning. Her job was to figure out how to win this war. The data showed that the Varakthi relied on overwhelming force in the opening attack. They crushed resistance quickly and then moved to occupation. They had never faced an enemy who could hit back hard. Claire developed a 3-phase plan. Phase 1 would retake New Terra and establish forward bases. Phase 2 would systematically destroy Varakthi military power across their frontier. Phase 3 would drive into their core systems and force total surrender. The plan was aggressive and risky. It was also the only way to win quickly. Admiral Carter approved the plan immediately. Speed was essential. Every day the Varakthi held New Terra, more colonists suffered. Every week they remained strong. They could attack another human world. The fleet would launch as soon as enough ships were ready. That meant 6 weeks. 6 long weeks of preparation. Engineers worked miracles during those weeks. Chief Engineer Patricia Coleman supervised weapons installation on the new flagship. The TDS Vengeance was the largest warship humanity had ever built. Its main guns could punch through a mountain. Its missiles carried enough explosive power to level a city. Its armor could take hits that would vaporize smaller ships. Patricia knew every system on the Vengeance. She had helped design half of them. The ship represented centuries of human innovation compressed into one deadly package. The Varakthi would learn a hard lesson. Humans might be newcomers to the galaxy, but they were very good at building things, especially weapons. While humanity prepared, the Varakthi remained confident. War Prince Thrax sent regular reports from New Terra. Everything was proceeding as planned. The human survivors were docile. Some were even cooperating, hoping for better treatment. Thrax recommended moving to the next target within a month. Supreme Overlord Kazrith read the reports with satisfaction. The Varakthi High Command met to discuss expansion plans. They debated which human colony to attack next. Some wanted to target military outposts. Others preferred more agricultural worlds. Nobody suggested that the humans might be preparing to fight back. The idea seemed ridiculous. Varakthi scouts did detect increased ship movements in human space. The reports reached military intelligence offices. Analysts noted the activity, but dismissed it as defensive redeployment. They assumed the humans were pulling forces back to protect their core worlds. This made sense according to Varakthi strategic thinking. Conquered species always retreated and fortified. They never attacked. This assumption was a fatal mistake. The Varakthi had fought many species. All of them had followed predictable patterns. They had never encountered humans before. They did not understand human history. They did not know about world wars or the fierce determination humans showed when truly threatened. They were about to learn. 6 weeks after the fall of New Terra, the first Retribution fleet assembled at Jupiter's orbit. 400 warships floated in formation. Thousands of fighters nested in carrier bays. Tens of thousands of soldiers waited in transport ships. Supply vessels carried enough ammunition and fuel for a long campaign. This was the largest military force humanity had ever created. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and looked at the fleet displays. Every ship showed green status. Every commander reported ready. The moment had come. He opened a channel to all ships. His message was brief. New Terra had called for help. Now help was coming. The Varakthi had shown humanity what they were. Now humanity would show them what that meant. Captain Brooks listened to the Admiral's speech from her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew worked quietly. They knew their jobs. They had trained for this. Helen felt a cold calm settle over her. This was it. This was what all the years of service had been leading to. She touched a photo attached to her console. It showed her sister's family. They had lived on New Terra, past tense. Now she had work to do. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed together. 400 warships vanished from Jupiter's orbit in a cascade of light. They were heading to the Kepler 442 system. They were going to retake New Terra. They were going to make the Varakthi pay for every human life lost. The galaxy was about to learn something important. Humans could be peaceful. Humans could be reasonable. But humans could also be absolutely terrifying when they decided to fight. War Prince Thrax had no idea the fleet was coming. He sat in his command center on New Terra reviewing reports. Everything seemed normal. The human slaves were working in the fields. The detention camps were quiet. Another day of conquest complete. Another day of Varakthi dominance. He went to sleep that night satisfied with his work. It was the last peaceful sleep he would ever have. The human fleet would arrive in 2 days. The reconquest was about to begin, and the Varakthi were completely unprepared for what was coming. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. 400 warships appeared in space like avenging angels. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Admiral Carter watched his tactical displays come alive with data. 50 Varakthi warships orbited New Terra. They were in defensive formations but not on high alert. They had no idea what was about to hit them. Captain Brooks commanded the Vanguard group. 18 ships formed up behind her cruiser. Their orders were simple. Hit hard, hit fast, and give the enemy no time to think. Helen checked her weapon status. Everything showed green. She opened a channel to her battle group. Her voice was calm and professional. All ships prepare for combat. Weapons free on my mark. On New Terra, War Prince Thrax was eating breakfast when the alarms went off. He rushed to the command center still wearing his sleeping robes. The displays showed something impossible. Hundreds of human ships. His officers were shouting reports and questions. How had they gotten here so fast? Where had they come from? How many ships did the humans have? Thrax ignored the chaos and focused on his screens. He counted the enemy ships. 400 at least. His 50 ships were outnumbered 8-1. But numbers were not everything. Varakthi warriors were superior. Varakthi ships were powerful. He ordered his fleet to battle stations and prepared to defend his conquest. He still believed he could win. Admiral Carter watched the Varakthi fleet react to his arrival. They were moving into attack formation. Good. Let them come. He gave the order to advance. The human fleet surged forward in coordinated groups. Each battle group knew its target. Each ship knew its job. This was not a random assault. This was precision warfare. The first missiles launched from human ships while still outside Varakthi weapons range. Hundreds of missiles streaked across the darkness. The Varakthi tried to shoot them down, but there were too many. Explosions blossomed across the enemy formation. 3 Varakthi cruisers disappeared in balls of fire before they could return a single shot. Captain Brooks led her battle group straight at the Varakthi center. The enemy ships fired desperately. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled space. But human ships were faster and their armor was stronger. Helen's cruiser took several direct hits. The shields flared but held. She returned fire with everything she had. Her main guns tore into a Varakthi destroyer, cutting it in half. The battle turned into a massacre within the first hour. Human ships maneuvered circles around the Varakthi fleet. Human weapons hit from longer range and with greater accuracy. Human electronic warfare systems jammed Varakthi communications and targeting. The enemy fought bravely, but they were outmatched in every way. Thrax watched his fleet die. Ship after ship went dark on his displays. He ordered retreats and regrouping, but nothing worked. The humans were everywhere. They anticipated every move. They exploited every weakness. This was not battle. This was extermination. For the first time in his life, Thrax felt fear. He tried to escape. His flagship broke away from the battle and accelerated toward the edge of the system. Maybe he could reach faster than light speed. Maybe he could warn the High Command. But Commander Lisa Grant had been waiting for exactly this move. Her destroyer squadron intercepted the flagship. 6 human ships surrounded the massive Varakhthi vessel. Lisa opened a channel to the enemy ship. She gave Thrax one chance: surrender or die. The War Prince considered fighting. He considered ramming his ship into the humans. But he was trapped and he knew it. His flagship was crippled. His fleet was destroyed. He had failed completely. With a bitter curse, he ordered his crew to surrender. The space battle ended after 4 hours. 47 Varakhthi warships were destroyed. 3 managed to escape to faster than light speed. Those 3 would carry news of the disaster back to Varakhthi space. Admiral Carter watched them go. Let them run. Let them tell their leaders what happened here. Let the Varakhthi know that humanity was coming. With orbital space secure, the liberation of New Terra could begin. Colonel Ryan Murphy led the first wave of Marines down to the surface. His dropships landed outside Meridian under covering fire from Navy ships. The Varakhthi ground forces saw them coming and prepared defensive positions. They had 50,000 soldiers on the planet. They thought they could hold. They were wrong. Human Marines in powered combat armor were faster and stronger than Varakhthi warriors. Human tactics were flexible and creative. Human weapons were designed for exactly this kind of fight. Ryan led his troops through the ruins of the capital city. They cleared buildings one by one. They showed the Varakhthi what real soldiers looked like. The detention camps held 600,000 survivors. Dr. Sarah Williams arrived with the second wave of ships. She brought medical teams and supplies. What she found in the camps made her sick with rage. Starving people, untreated wounds, evidence of torture, and worse. The Varakhthi had treated human prisoners like animals. Sarah vowed that every single survivor would receive the best care possible. The fighting on New Terra lasted 3 days. Varakhthi forces tried to regroup, but they had no orbital support and no supply lines. Human forces hunted them down systematically. Some Varakhthi warriors tried to surrender. Others fought to the death. Ryan gave them the choice, but he did not try hard to convince them. After seeing what they had done to the colonists, he was fine either way. On the 4th day, New Terra was free. Human flags flew over Meridian again. Survivors stumbled out of the camps into the sunlight. Medical teams worked around the clock. Engineers began repairing damage. The colony would need years to fully recover. But it was free. It was home again. Admiral Carter visited the planet briefly. He walked through the detention camps. He saw the mass graves. He spoke with survivors who told him about the massacre. Every word and every image hardened his resolve. New Terra was liberated, but the war was not over. Not even close. The Varakhthi needed to pay for all of this. Every single bit. Intelligence reports showed 6 Varakhthi outposts within striking distance. These were military bases and supply depots supporting their frontier operations. Frank made his decision quickly. The fleet would not stop. They would not rest. They would hit every Varakhthi target they could reach. The message had to be clear. Attack humans and face total destruction. He divided his fleet into 3 battle groups. Each would attack 2 targets simultaneously. This would stretch Varakhthi defenses and prevent them from concentrating forces. Captain Brooks volunteered to lead one group. She wanted to keep fighting. She wanted to make sure the Varakhthi never threatened another human world. The attacks began within a week. 3 human battle groups struck 6 Varakhthi bases at the same time. The aliens were caught completely off guard. They had not expected humans to be so aggressive. They had not expected humans to move so fast. Every base sent desperate calls for help, but help would not arrive in time. Lieutenant Jack Peterson led a reconnaissance squadron to scout the next set of targets. His small ships jumped deep into Varakhthi space using advanced stealth systems. They found a major supply depot. The base was defended by only 2 cruisers and some orbital weapons. Jack marked the location and jumped back to report. This target was too good to pass up. Admiral Carter sent a strike force immediately. 20 ships jumped in, destroyed the depot, and left before Varakhthi reinforcements could respond. The attack took less than 4 hours. The psychological impact was devastating. The Varakthi had thought their rear areas were safe. Now nowhere was safe. Humans could strike anywhere at any time. News of the defeats reached Varakthi High Command. Supreme Overlord Kazrith finally understood the scale of the problem. The humans were not retreating. They were attacking. They were winning. He called an emergency meeting of his war council. Angry accusations flew. How had this happened? Why were the humans so strong? Who was responsible for this disaster? Kazrith executed 3 admirals for incompetence. This did nothing to solve the actual problem, but it made him feel better. Then he made his decision. All available fleets would be recalled. They would assemble at Arcturus and destroy the human fleet in one decisive battle. The Varakthi would throw everything they had at these upstart humans and crush them completely. Fleet Commander Varash received orders to take command of the assembled forces. He was a veteran of 50 campaigns. He had never lost a battle. He looked at the reports about human capabilities and felt confident. The humans were good, but they were still outnumbered. He would position his fleet at Arcturus and wait for them to come. Then he would destroy them. Human intelligence picked up the Varakthi movements immediately. Agents reported massive fleet concentrations at Arcturus. 200 Varakthi warships assembling for battle. Admiral Carter smiled when he heard the news. The enemy was doing exactly what he had hoped. They were gathering their forces in one place. They were giving him a chance to destroy them all at once. Perfect. The human fleet arrived at Arcturus 3 weeks after liberating New Terra. Admiral Carter brought 180 warships. He knew the Varakthi had 200 ships waiting. On paper, the enemy had an advantage. But Frank was not worried about numbers. He was counting on superior tactics and better technology. Plus, he had a surprise planned. Fleet Commander Varash watched the human fleet emerge from faster-than-light travel. He stood on the bridge of his command dreadnought and studied the tactical displays. The humans were deploying in a standard battle formation. 3 groups with the heaviest ships in the center. Varash smiled. This would be easier than he thought. The humans were fighting conventionally. They would lose. Captain Brooks commanded the center group. She held position as the Varakthi fleet began its advance. The enemy ships moved forward in a massive wall formation. They wanted to surround and overwhelm the human forces. Helen watched them come and did not move. Her orders were to hold this position no matter what. She trusted Admiral Carter. He had a plan. The Varakthi fleet spread out as it advanced. Varash wanted to envelop the human forces from multiple directions. He committed his entire fleet to the attack. This was the decisive battle. He would use every ship and every weapon. The humans would be destroyed completely. The Varakthi would prove their superiority once and for all. As the Varakthi ships moved deeper into the system, Admiral Carter sprang his trap. 50 additional human warships had been hiding behind Arcturus' largest moon. They had used advanced stealth systems to remain invisible. Now they powered up and jumped into action. They appeared behind the Varakthi fleet, cutting off any retreat. At the same moment, hidden weapons platforms throughout the asteroid field activated. Human engineers had spent weeks placing these remote gun batteries. Each platform carried enough missiles and energy weapons to threaten a cruiser. There were hundreds of them. They opened fire all at once. The Varakthi fleet was caught in a devastating crossfire. Ships exploded on all sides. Varash tried to reorganize his forces, but human electronic warfare systems were jamming his communications. Individual Varakthi captains made their own decisions. Some tried to fight their way forward. Others attempted to escape. The coordinated formation fell apart into chaos. Captain Brooks saw the trap close and gave the order to advance. Her battle group surged forward and crashed into the confused enemy fleet. At close range, human weapons tore through Varakthi ships. Helen's cruiser targeted the enemy flagship, but it was too far away. She settled for destroying everything in her path. Her guns never stopped firing. Commander Nathan Price led the fighter squadrons into battle. Human pilots flew ships that were faster and more maneuverable than anything the Varakthi had. They darted through the enemy formation like sharks through a school of fish. Nathan personally shot down 6 enemy fighters in the first 10 minutes. His squadron destroyed dozens more. The battle raged for 18 hours. It was brutal and merciless. Human ships pressed the attack from every angle. Varakthi warriors fought with desperate courage, but courage was not enough. Their technology was inferior. Their tactics were outdated. Their coordination was broken. They were being systematically destroyed. Vorash realized he was losing. His proud fleet was being torn apart. 200 ships were being defeated by a smaller human force. This should not be possible, but it was happening. He tried to order a retreat, but most ships could not receive his commands through the jamming. Those that did receive the order were already trapped. There was no escape. The human dreadnought Relentless, commanded by Captain Jennifer Cooper, closed in on the Varakthi flagship. Jennifer had been hunting this target since the battle began. Now she had him. 3 human battleships formed up with her. Together they concentrated fire on the enemy command ship. The Varakthi shields failed under the sustained assault. Vorash saw death coming. Explosions ripped through his ship. Fires spread across multiple decks. His bridge crew was dead or dying. He tried to give orders, but nobody could hear him anymore. The great fleet commander, who had never lost a battle, had one final thought before the reactor exploded. How had this happened? Then there was only light and silence. By the time the battle ended, 160 Varakthi warships were destroyed. 30 more were crippled beyond repair. Only 10 managed to escape. They jumped to faster than light speed and fled in different directions. Human losses were significant but manageable. 23 ships destroyed, 41 damaged. The strategic balance had shifted decisively. Admiral Carter surveyed the battlefield from the Vengeance. Debris floated everywhere. Escape pods drifted among the wreckage. He ordered search and rescue operations for any survivors. The Varakthi prisoners would be treated according to the rules of war. Humans did not massacre the helpless. That was what separated them from their enemies. News of the Battle of Arcturus spread across the galaxy within days. Other alien species learned that the Varakthi had been defeated. The mighty dominion that had terrorized the region for generations had lost its greatest fleet. Humanity had won a crushing victory. The galaxy took notice. The Talvarian Republic sent ambassadors to Earth. The Talvarians were a peaceful trading confederation. They had suffered under Varakthi aggression for years. Now they wanted to help humanity finish the job. Ambassador Victoria Hayes met with the Talvarian diplomats. The alliance was signed within a week. The Talvarians would provide intelligence and supply bases. Other species began to see humanity differently. Before, humans were just another young species trying to survive. Now humans were warriors who could defeat the Varakthi in open battle. Some species saw potential allies. Others saw a threat. But everyone saw power. Humanity had proven itself on the galactic stage. Within the Varakthi Dominion, panic spread. The High Command received reports of the disaster. Supreme Overlord Kazrith went into a rage. He executed more admirals. He ordered investigations. He demanded answers. But no amount of executions would change the facts. The Varakthi military had been broken. The humans were coming, and nothing seemed able to stop them. Resistance movements on occupied worlds heard the news and took action. Species that had been conquered by the Varakthi began to rebel. They attacked Varakthi garrisons. They sabotaged supply lines. They made Varakthi rule impossible. Humanity had given them hope. Now they were fighting for their freedom. Major Chris Anderson led human special forces teams to support these uprisings. He provided weapons, training, and coordination. His teams taught rebel groups how to fight effectively. They shared intelligence and planned operations together. Chris saw that this war was about more than just revenge for New Terra. It was about liberating everyone from Varakthi tyranny. Admiral Carter held a conference with his officers. They discussed the next phase of the campaign. The Varakthi still had forces scattered across their empire, but those forces were demoralized and divided. Now was the time to strike hard. Frank proposed a bold plan. They would advance directly toward the Varakthi homeworld. They would end this war decisively. The plan was aggressive. Some officers worried it was too aggressive, but Captain Brooks supported it immediately. She said the Varakthi needed to understand that humanity would never stop, never slow down, never forgive. The attack on New Terra demanded total victory. Anything less would be a betrayal of those who died. The other officers agreed. The fleet would advance. Human forces regrouped and resupplied. Damaged ships were repaired or sent back to Earth. Fresh ships arrived from the constantly running shipyards. Reinforcements brought the fleet strength back up to 300 warships. This would be the hammer that broke the Varakthi Dominion forever. General Claire Mitchell coordinated ground campaigns across 12 Varakthi-occupied worlds. Human Marines landed and liberated these planets one by one. The Varakthi defenders fought hard, but they could not stop the human advance. World after world was freed. Species that had lived under Varakthi rule for generations tasted freedom for the first time. On each liberated world, the same pattern repeated. Human forces defeated the Varakthi garrison. Local populations rose up to help. Reconstruction began immediately. Humanity did not conquer these worlds. They freed them and helped them rebuild. This was not empire building. This was justice. The legend of human warriors spread. Varakthi soldiers who had once considered themselves the greatest fighters in the galaxy now feared facing human troops. Stories circulated about human marines who never quit, human pilots who never missed, human commanders who never lost. Some stories were exaggerated. Many were completely true. 9 months after the fall of New Terra, the human armada approached the Varakthi home system. Varakth Prime lay ahead. This was where the Dominion had started. This was where it would end. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and prepared for the final battle. One way or another, the war would be decided here. The Varakthi homeworld appeared on the tactical displays. Varakth Prime was a harsh planet with red skies and dark oceans. This world had spawned the Dominion. From here, the Varakthi had launched their campaigns of conquest. Now human warships surrounded it. The hunters had become the hunted. Supreme Overlord Kazareth watched the human fleet arrive from his palace. He had assembled every remaining ship for the defense. 80 warships orbited the planet. It was all he had left. Centuries of military power reduced to this. He knew he could not win, but he would make the humans pay for their victory. He would die fighting. Admiral Carter gave his fleet one final briefing. This was the last battle. After today, the Varakthi Dominion would cease to exist. He reminded his people why they were here. 2 million colonists murdered. Innocent people killed for no reason except Varakthi arrogance. Today was about justice. Today was about making sure this never happened again. The battle for Varakth Prime began at dawn. 300 human warships advanced in perfect formation. The Varakthi defenders fought with desperate courage. They knew this was the end. They would die defending their homeworld. But courage alone could not change the outcome. The human fleet was too strong. The human advantage was too great. Captain Brooks led the assault on the orbital defenses. Her battle group punched through the Varakthi lines and engaged the enemy fleet directly. The fighting was intense but brief. Human ships destroyed the defenders methodically. Within 3 hours, the orbital battle was over. Varakth Prime lay defenseless below. Admiral Carter ordered precision strikes on military targets only. Human ships bombarded army bases, weapons factories, and command centers. Civilian areas were untouched. Frank refused to become like the Varakthi. Humanity fought with honor even when facing an enemy who had shown none. The bombardment lasted 2 hours. Every military installation on the planet was destroyed. Colonel Ryan Murphy led the ground assault. Thousands of Marines landed across the capital city. They moved toward the palace where Kazareth had fortified himself. Varakthi elite guards defended every street. These warriors wore the best armor and carried the finest weapons. They were the absolute best the Dominion had to offer. It did not matter. Human Marines were better trained, better equipped, and vastly more experienced. They had been fighting Varakthi forces for 9 months. They knew every trick and every weakness. Ryan's troops advanced block by block. The elite guards fought with fanatical determination, but they could not stop the human tide. The assault on the palace lasted 6 hours. Kazareth made his final stand in his throne room, surrounded by his last 50 warriors. Ryan offered surrender one final time. Kazareth refused with a snarl. He would die as a warrior. Ryan respected that choice. Human Marines stormed the throne room in a final brutal assault. When the smoke cleared, Kazareth was alive but wounded. His guards were all dead. Ryan stood over the Supreme Overlord and looked down without pity. This creature had ordered the massacre of New Terra. He had built an empire on the suffering of countless species. Now his empire was gone. Now he would face justice. Kazareth was dragged from his throne room in chains. The symbol of Varakthi power was defeated and captured. Word spread across the planet quickly. The Dominion had fallen. The war was over. Varakthi civilians emerged from their homes uncertain and afraid. They did not know what the humans would do to them. Admiral Carter broadcast a message to the entire planet. The war was over. The Varakthi military was defeated, but this was not about genocide or revenge. Civilians would not be harmed. Those who laid down weapons would be treated fairly. War criminals would face trial. But ordinary citizens had nothing to fear from humanity. The message shocked many Varakthi. They had expected slaughter. They had expected humans to do to them what they had done to New Terra. Instead, they found mercy. Human medical teams treated wounded Varakthi soldiers alongside their own. Human engineers began repairing civilian infrastructure. This was not conquest. This was something the Varakthi had never seen before. This was justice tempered with mercy. Khazareth and his surviving war leaders were transported to Earth. A galactic tribunal was established. Judges from multiple species presided. The evidence presented was overwhelming. Video footage from New Terra, testimony from survivors, records from dozens of other conquered worlds. The Varakthi leadership had committed atrocities on a massive scale. The trial lasted 3 months. Khazareth showed no remorse. He claimed he had only been following the natural order. The strong conquered the weak. That was how the universe worked. The judges listened to his words and found him guilty of every charge. The sentence was life imprisonment on a remote penal colony. He would spend his remaining years thinking about what he had done. The Varakthi Dominion was officially dissolved. Their military was disbanded completely. Their territory was divided into zones supervised by an international committee. The goal was not to punish ordinary Varakthi citizens. The goal was to prevent the Dominion from ever rising again. New governments would be established. Democratic ones, peaceful ones. Reconstruction began immediately. Human engineers and aid workers flooded into former Varakthi territory. They rebuilt what the war had destroyed. They helped establish new institutions. They taught different ways of thinking. It would take generations, but the Varakthi would learn to be part of the galactic community, rather than predators upon it. President Laura Bennett addressed the newly formed Galactic Council. Representatives from 40 species filled the chamber. Laura proposed a mutual defense pact. Any attack on civilian populations would trigger collective response. No species would stand alone against aggression. Together they would maintain peace. The vote was overwhelming. The pact was approved. Humanity took a leadership role in the new order. Not because they sought power, but because they had proven themselves. Other species trusted human judgment. They had seen how humans fought. They had also seen how humans treated defeated enemies. Humans were warriors when necessary, but they preferred peace. That combination earned respect. On New Terra, reconstruction proceeded slowly but steadily. Governor Linda Martinez oversaw the rebuilding. The colony would never forget what happened. A massive memorial was erected in Meridian. It listed every name of every person who died in the massacre. Above the names, an inscription was carved into black stone. We will remember. We will never forget. We will never allow this to happen again. Admiral Carter retired from active service. He had done his duty. The war was won. Justice had been served. In his final address to the fleet, he spoke about the lessons learned. Humanity had not wanted war, but when war came, they fought with everything they had. Superior technology helped. Better tactics helped. But what really mattered was determination. Humans fought for something worth fighting for. Captain Brooks took command of the defense fleet stationed at New Terra. She would ensure the colony was never vulnerable again. The base she commanded was one of the most heavily defended positions in human space. Nobody would ever threaten New Terra again. Not while Helen drew breath. She made that promise to herself and to everyone who died. 5 years after the war ended, humanity had established itself as a major galactic power. Human diplomats mediated disputes. Human peacekeepers maintained order. Human merchants traded across the stars. The galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in generations. The Varakthi had been an example. Attack humans and face total destruction. Help humans and find willing allies. On Varakth Prime, a new generation grew up learning different values. They learned about the crimes of their ancestors. They learned about the price of aggression. Some young Varakthi joined human-led peacekeeping forces. They wanted to make up for what their people had done. They wanted to show that Varakthi could change. In human space, the war was remembered but not celebrated. Memorials honored the fallen. Veterans spoke about duty and sacrifice. Military academies studied the campaign as an example of how to fight and win. But nobody glorified war itself. War was terrible. War was necessary sometimes, but peace was always better. The galaxy learned a valuable lesson when New Terra fell. Humans looked weak because they avoided conflict. The Varakthi mistook restraint for inability. They learned too late that humans were not weak. Humans were patient. When pushed too far, they responded with overwhelming force. The galaxy burned in return for new Terra, and from those flames rose a new age of peace built on the understanding that some species should never be threatened. 10 years after the war ended, the galaxy had changed completely. The fear and violence that had defined interstellar relations for generations was fading. Species that had hidden from the Varakthi now traded openly. Colonies that had lived in terror now prospered in peace. Humanity had not just won a war. They had changed the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Captain Helen Brooks walked through the rebuilt streets of Meridian. She was older now with gray streaks in her hair. She still commanded the defense fleet at New Terra, but today she was here for the anniversary ceremony. 10 years since the massacre. 10 years since humanity learned it could be pushed too far. The memorial plaza was filled with people. Survivors of the attack stood with their children and grandchildren. Veterans of the liberation wore their uniforms with quiet pride. Diplomats from a dozen species had come to pay respects. The memorial itself was a simple black wall carved with names. So many names. Too many names. Helen placed flowers at the base of the wall. She found the section listing the defense forces. Commander Jake Sullivan's name was there. He had died buying time for children to escape. Helen had never met him, but she knew his story. Everyone knew his story. He was one of thousands of heroes from that terrible day. Governor Linda Martinez gave a speech to the assembled crowd. She talked about remembrance and resilience. New Terra had been broken, but not destroyed. The colony had rebuilt. The population had grown back to 3 million. Life continued, but they would never forget. The names on the wall ensured that every child born on New Terra learned those names, learned what happened, learned why it must never happen again. After the ceremony, Helen met with some of the survivors. They thanked her for liberating the planet. She deflected the praise. She had just been doing her job. They insisted. She had given them back their lives, their world, their future. Helen accepted their thanks with grace. These people had suffered so much. If her service brought them some peace, that was enough. Later that evening, Helen sat in a quiet bar with some old friends. Admiral Carter had come out of retirement for the anniversary. Colonel Ryan Murphy was there too. They shared drinks and stories. They talked about the war like old soldiers do, not glorifying it, just remembering, honoring those who did not come back. Frank Carter looked older but still sharp. He ran a military academy now, training the next generation of officers. He made sure they understood both how to fight and when to fight. The war with the Varakthi had been necessary, but war should always be the last option. Peace was better. Always. The academy taught both lessons equally. Ryan Murphy had stayed in the service. He commanded special operations now. His team still supported liberation movements across the galaxy. Species still suffered under various tyrants. Humanity helped where it could. Not by conquering, by teaching people to free themselves. Ryan believed in that mission. He had seen what freedom meant to people who had never known it. The conversation turned to the Varakthi. Their former empire was unrecognizable now. Democracy had taken root in most systems. The younger generation barely remembered the Dominion. They were building something new, something better. Some former Varakthi warriors served in the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. They wore human-style uniforms and followed human-style tactics. They fought to protect rather than conquer. Not everyone had changed. Some Varakthi still believed in the old ways. Small groups tried to restart the Dominion. They never got far. Humanity and their allies crushed these attempts quickly and decisively. The galaxy would not tolerate that kind of aggression anymore. The lesson of the war was clear. Attack civilians and face total destruction. Helen mentioned that she had recently met a young Varakthi officer. He was barely 20. He had asked her about the war. Helen told him the truth. His people had made a terrible mistake. They had attacked the wrong species at the wrong time. Humans had responded with overwhelming force. The young officer listened quietly. Then he thanked her for not destroying his entire species. Helen told him that was not the human way. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Frank asked about Helen's plans. She was thinking about retirement. Maybe teaching at his academy. Maybe just settling down somewhere quiet. She had served for 30 years. That was enough. Ryan joked that none of them could really retire. They would always be soldiers. Helen laughed but knew he was probably right. Across the galaxy, humanity's influence continued to grow. Not through conquest but through example. Human engineers helped build infrastructure. Human doctors treated diseases. Human teachers spread literacy. Human merchants traded fairly. Humanity showed that a species could be both powerful and peaceful. That strength did not require cruelty. The Galactic Council met regularly now. Representatives from 80 species worked together to maintain peace. Disputes were resolved through negotiation. Trade flowed freely. Pirates and raiders found no safe havens. The Council's peacekeeping forces, led often by human officers, kept order across thousands of systems. President Victoria Hayes, Laura Bennett's successor, addressed the Council on the 10th anniversary of the war's end. She spoke about the cost of peace. 2 million colonists had died on New Terra. Hundreds of thousands more had died in the war that followed. The price had been terrible, but it had bought something valuable. A galaxy where species could live without fear of conquest. Victoria reminded the Council that peace required vigilance. The Varakthi had seemed unstoppable before humanity stopped them. Other threats would emerge. Other tyrants would try to build empires. The Council had to remain strong. Not aggressive. Not expansionist. But strong enough to protect the weak. That was the lesson humanity taught. That was the legacy of New Terra. On Earth, monuments to the war stood in many cities. Simple memorials that listed the fallen. Schools taught about the war in history classes, not as a story of glory but as a story of necessity. War was terrible, but sometimes necessary. The important thing was to fight for the right reasons. To fight with honor. To stop when victory was achieved. The human military maintained its strength but focused on defense. The fleet was powerful enough to defeat any likely enemy, but it did not seek enemies. It patrolled trade routes. It responded to distress calls. It showed the flag in distant systems. The message was clear. Humanity was strong. Humanity was peaceful. But humanity would fight if necessary. Helen Brooks retired 2 years later. She settled on New Terra in a small house outside Meridian. She could see the memorial from her porch. She visited it sometimes. She spoke to the names on the wall. She told them that their sacrifice had not been wasted. The colony was safe. The galaxy was peaceful. They could rest. Young people on New Terra grew up hearing stories about the war. They learned about the massacre. They learned about the liberation. They learned about the price of freedom. Some joined the military to protect what their parents and grandparents had built. Others became teachers or doctors or farmers. All of them carried the memory of what happened. The galaxy remembered too. When new species made first contact, they learned about humanity quickly. They learned about human technology and human culture. They also learned about what happened when humans were threatened. The story of New Terra became a legend, a warning, a promise. Humanity had shown that peaceful species could become warriors when necessary. That technological advancement combined with moral purpose was unstoppable. That restraint was not weakness. That mercy was not softness. These lessons shaped galactic civilization for generations. The Varakthi Dominion became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened to empires built on cruelty. Their former subjects built new societies based on different principles: democracy, freedom, cooperation. The change was not easy. It took decades. But it happened, and humanity helped make it happen. 20 years after the war, Helen Brooks died peacefully in her sleep. She was 72. Her funeral was attended by thousands. Veterans came from across human space. Alien diplomats sent condolences. The governor of New Terra gave the eulogy. Helen had been a warrior when needed, a protector always, a symbol of everything humanity had become. Her name was added to the memorial wall. Not among the massacre victims, but in a new section. Heroes of the Liberation. Her name joined thousands of others who had fought to free New Terra, who had fought to make the galaxy safer, who had shown that humans would never accept tyranny. The years passed. The galaxy remained mostly peaceful. Small conflicts erupted sometimes. Pirates raided occasionally. But the great wars of conquest were over. The Varakthi had been the last empire of that kind. Their defeat ensured no one else would try. When historians looked back at this era, they marked it as a turning point. Before, the galaxy was dominated by fear and violence. After, cooperation and trade became the norm. The change came because one species refused to accept barbarism. Because humans fought not for conquest but for justice. Because every gun roared when innocent people were slaughtered. The memorial on New Terra remained the most visited site in human space. Millions came every year. They walked past the wall of names. They learned the stories. They understood the cost. And they carried that understanding forward into a galaxy that was safer because of what happened here. The inscription above the names had been expanded. It now read a simple truth that